So, a warm welcome to this event exploring the business opportunities within renewables. And both to the people here at the Tech Lab, full crowd, full house, and a lot of people following us on MS Teams as well. And 3 weeks ago at SNIC, then Erik Hjortland, he was saying that we can explore these new fuels as much as we want to. But what we really need to discuss is how we are going to get all the renewable energy that is necessary. So then we took him on his word. So now we are having that discussion. Innovation Norway, the Embassy, Norweb, NBOS, and sponsored by Mainstream Renewables and Eduardo Carlin, who is with us today. And we are looking forward to tight and effective sessions. There are no Q&A, but we can stay on and network afterwards. And if people write in their questions on MS Teams, I will make sure that they are answered from the right experts. So a warm welcome, and without further ado, I will introduce Norway's ambassador to Singapore, His Excellency Eivind S. Homma.
Good afternoon. Very happy to see all of you here, and good morning in Norway. I hope it's a good morning. Could be a little bit dark there, but they will get into it. And very pleased to welcome also to this Team Norway Singapore. Today's point of departure is that the world is facing tremendous challenges in the energy sector. But challenges are also offering opportunities to speed up the energy transition. We need petroleum and gas, absolutely, renewable and low emission solutions to complement each other in solving the energy trilemma. And with that, I mean, our future energy use needs to meet the requirement of security, affordability, and decarbonization. Energy security relies on robust energy infrastructure and the ability of energy providers to meet current and future demands. And affordability is equally important. The current situation with very high energy prices cannot be underestimated. Access to affordable energy is a key for economic growth, businesses, and livelihoods across the world. And we must meet the energy demand within the framework of our climate goals and environmental sustainability. So Norway started with hydro water. We went on to oil, moved into gas, and now we are heading into offshore wind, land wind, hydrogen, solar, and new phases. We have taken on a special responsibility for developing critical technologies for the global energy transition, such as carbon capture and storage, and to invest in zero or low emission energy production, energy efficiency, and technological development required to reduce global emissions. The Norwegian government has also committed to dramatically, I would say, scaling up the production of renewable energy from offshore wind. With our offshore oil and gas and maritime experience, Norwegian companies can play an important role in developing floating offshore wind globally. At home, the target is set to open up areas for offshore wind power production that will generate 30,000 megawatt of power in Norway by 2040. That is nearly equivalent to the amount of electricity we currently produce in Norway. So we're talking big, big numbers. One example here is Hywind Tampen, where Equinor last month started production from the first turbine. This will become the world's largest floating offshore wind park. Then, Singapore and Norway, we go far back as maritime and energy partners. We have built up a high degree of cooperation and mutual trust. And we have long seen Norwegian-owned vessels, offshore rigs, and platforms being built in Singapore shipyards. As shipyards and companies here are buying Norwegian design and equipment. And Singapore continues to serve as a key and very useful gateway for Norway to the rest of the region. So I close with saying I strongly believe that Norwegian company has much to offer within sun and wind power, which the Singaporean market and its industries can gain from. And we also have seen a number of Singaporean investments in this sector in Europe. So with that, I wish you a productive event and a happy holiday season a little bit later on this month. Thank you.
There is an expression, hopp etter Wirkola, or the ambassador is always a hard act to follow. First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to this Tech Lab. My name is Paul Kastman, and I'm the Director of Innovation Norway here in Singapore. This is my 5th year here, but I've actually also spent 8 years in China prior to that, covering energy and environment sectors, predominantly focusing on offshore wind, CCUS, as well as circular economy. The Tech Lab was partly set up to build a bridge between Norway and Singapore in a time where we expect there to be less travel. And even though the pandemic has subsided or is actually going into a new phase, we believe that the future will also mean that we do more things hybrid or digitally. And we wanted to make it easier for Norwegian companies to interact with local stakeholders, to have workshops, run demonstrations, and have virtual site visits to Norwegian sites or elsewhere from this place. So that is one of the reasons why we're here, as well as seminars like today on offshore renewables. Most of you might be familiar with Innovation Norway, but we are an agency under the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Norway, and we are one of the most important tools for helping innovation and growth of Norwegian industry. We are also working on internationalizing and helping companies with that, so setting up, establishing partnership with local partners, and so on. For Norwegian companies in Southeast Asia, like Ivan mentioned, Singapore is a natural hub, and this was emphasized and underlined by the latest business confidence survey that we did about a year ago. But of course, the world has changed quite a lot since then. We have we have the war in Ukraine mentioned by Ivan, and we have also severe drought, as well as technical issues with nuclear plants, which have led to this energy crunch in Europe. And this reverberates around the world. And we are also seeing other drivers. Last year, Singapore launched its Singapore Green Plan 2030, which focuses on diversifying its power generation. The energy market authorities are also looking to expand regional power grids to allow for the imports of more clean energy. This is something that could resemble the system that we have in the Nordics, and it represents an interesting opportunity for Norwegian companies, we think. We are working with our Finnish and Swedish friends to see how we could pursue these opportunities together with local partners. Another driver is the transport sector, most notably the maritime industry, where the maritime decarbonization blueprint came also, I believe, last year, if not this year, which stipulates clear targets for decarbonizing the maritime industry, transportation, both short sea and deep sea. And there are interesting opportunities within maritime electrification, hydrogen fuel cells, and also within the ammonia value chains that we think are very interesting. And we are presently building a high potential opportunity program where we are targeting these opportunities over a 5 to 6 year period with Norwegian companies and local partners. And there are events planned for both Singapore Maritime Week and Nord Shipping towards this effect. And as Anders said, on a related issue, it doesn't make a lot of sense to make this shift to clean fuels for ships if we don't have the fuel. So we need a substantial increase in clean energy production, which means developing onshore and offshore renewables. And Singaporean yards and asset owners are taking these opportunities, both regional and globally. And we see interesting partnerships forming between Norwegian and Singaporean companies in this regard. One example is obviously Semco Marine, working very closely with its company, Sevan, testing out the bucket design for floating offshore wind and so on. There are many other partnerships that could be mentioned. It is also important to have a regional perspective here. For instance, many of the projects will be developed in Vietnam, Taiwan, and so on. But quite a few of the decisions might actually be made elsewhere, in Singapore, for instance, when it comes to engineering, when it comes to vessel design that I mentioned, and production, as well as financing. And to help with the coordination and sharing between Norwegian companies and Team Norway in the region, we set up a regional energy network last year, which meets on a bi-monthly basis. The network today has more than 50 member companies, Rystad, Norway, and the regional embassies, as well as several of the companies presenting here today are members of this network. So I would also like to emphasize that we have a meeting next week. So for those of you that would like to know more about our plans and activities for next year, please get in touch with us and we'll inform you more about that. And with that, I would like to extend a special thanks to our partners, the embassy with Eivind Homme, as well as Enbas, Leo and Anders, and Erik Ellingsen representing Norway. Thank you. Come on up.
Yes, hello, good morning. There we are all. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Eivind says, hey. Good afternoon, good morning from Stavanger in Norway. It's a beautiful day here today. It's -2 and blue skies, so it's fantastic. My name is Erik Ellingsen. I'm director for Offshore Wind in Norwegian Energy Partners. I also lived in Singapore for 10 years. I moved back to Norway in 2019, so you will see me back very soon. I'm just going to present what Norwegian Energy Partners is doing here, and here you have our. See, we didn't practice on this, but well, we have to take it, I guess that. So we don't only concentrate on Southeast Asia. I think Singapore should also concentrate on Asia Pacific, as Paul says, when it comes to offshore wind and energy. And that's why I made a few slides here just to show the opportunities that we do have within offshore wind in the Asia Pacific market. Norwegian Energy Partners, we are also a non-profit organization, and we are under the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, and also the trade and industry organizations in Norway. And we are also funded by Equinor and Statkraft and 330 other different partners that we do have in Norway. We are part of then Team Norway, and in Singapore we are Team Norway with the embassy, with Innovation Norway and Norwegian Business Association Singapore. So yes, Singapore, as Paul says, is definitely a part of the offshore wind industry in the Asia Pacific. I mean, we have the Capital Sembcorp construction of substations. We have wind carriers that are being built in Singapore, and many of the companies also have their main offices in Singapore. So we are definitely present there, and we can run all these projects throughout Asia Pacific from Singapore. We talk about the gigawatt. I would like to show this one. What is actually a gigawatt? A gigawatt is then 1,000 megawatt, and one turbine. You can see the size of it there. And for one normal project for offshore wind, if you say 1 gigawatt, that's 83 of these big constructions, turbines, and as you can see, the size of it, they're placed on a football field. It's enormous amount of steel and logistics and parts that goes into this. And the forecast for the Asia Pacific market is actually 100 gigawatt, which means 8,300 turbines or constructions like this throughout the region. And this will then give power to 30 million homes. The large projects are well, we see them now in Korea, and I just want to show this to see that in one project out of Korea, the requirements there is actually up to 150 kilometers of chain. for the mooring systems. Cables, 170 kilometers, export cables, and there's 2 times with 7,000 tons of steel. So there's a lot of material going in there. So, and for one project, which is, we can have this as an example outside Scotland, for one project to install 84 turbines, they would actually use 50 different vessels in putting all this together. If we look at the different countries, Vietnam, which can also be run out of Singapore and in Vietnam, of course, they're looking for the first 5 gigawatt plants offshore. And Equinor is positioned itself in Vietnam with an office in Hanoi this summer. Korea has a goal of 13 gigawatt of offshore wind by 2030. And there we have Equinor, Aker Offshore Wind and Deep Wind Offshore, which is a company from Haugesund in Norway, involved. And together they are actually running up to 10 gigawatt of projects, floating wind offshore Korea. So the Norwegians are definitely involved. And the same in Taiwan. They also have a goal of 5.5 gigawatt within 2025 and a further 15 gigawatt construction by 2035. Japan ambitions to install 45 gigawatt by 2040. And Equinor and other consortiums and companies are positioned themselves to bid for round 2 coming up now, and then 3 next year and 4. Japan, they will issue out 1 gigawatt of auctions every year for the next 10 years. So there's a big market. And Australia coming up now, 2 gigawatt of offshore wind installations by 2032 and 9 gigawatt by 2040. So you can see that the market is really, really big going forward. And also the Philippines. There was a World Bank report issued in July this year, and there's a theoretical potential of 21 gigawatt for the next, 20 to 30 years. And there are 16 projects already announced. This is just an overview of what we find in the Asia Pacific market for offshore wind. As I said, 100 gigawatt is in the line. Norwegian Energy Partners, we measure all this, and we have our online offshore wind tool where you find all these projects all over the world. You can drag out all information that is needed. And our partners get these reports. They have access to all these reports online, and we also help them with local advisory support in all the markets that we operate. So that is Norwegian Energy Partners, just a short update. The main thing here is that we do work very closely with MSC, and we work very closely with Innovation Norway in the markets we are in. Thank you from Stavanger.
Can you hear me okay? This is Mark.
Yes.
Should I start my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, good. Can you see my screen? Yes, okay. So my name is Mark Hutchinson. I'm the chair of the Southeast Asia Task Force for the Global Wind Energy Council. And on the right, you can see a report that we jointly published this year, this year with the Association of Singapore Marine Industries, or ASME. The purpose of the report is to understand what is needed to transition Singapore's very substantial offshore capabilities in the oil and gas sector into offshore wind. You can see the report is available on both our website below and on the ASME website. You can find it very quickly with a Google search. So for those of you who don't know, GWEC is a nonprofit trade association that acts as the authoritative voice for the global wind energy industry. Our members represent more than 1,500 companies, organizations, and institutions in over 80 countries, including manufacturers, developers, component suppliers, research institutes, national wind and renewables associations, and many others. We work very collaboratively across the industry. And for example, we do advocacy and policy, of which this project with ASME would be part of. So we have a lot of activities, and I encourage you to join as many as you can, and please join GWEC if you haven't already. So the report had 4 main sections. One is a review of offshore wind, the developments both globally and in APAC. Most critically, it looked at the supply chain and jobs available in different sections of the supply chain, because the government is extremely interested, as you might imagine, in ensuring the sustainable transition to offshore wind for its current oil and gas sectors. And then we, of course, spoke to the industry to really understand sort of their penetration currently and their strategy. So just to be clear, most of the work for this was done last year, and just because of COVID restrictions, we couldn't actually hold a physical launch until April this year. So a lot has actually happened since we launched this, but it's mostly in the right direction. And of course, we did an analysis on the needs and strategy to accelerate the sector's further penetration into offshore wind. So you can see here the components of an offshore wind supply, on the left, and on the bottom left, you can see sort of the project value chain. Offshore wind projects typically have identical turbines mounted mostly on identical foundations. And this reduces costs. And the idea here is given, the scale that Eric spoke of earlier, you have to get this cost down, and you have to make it in a very factory-like condition. Otherwise, you can't treat these as one-offs. You're not making something that's unique. So you're trying to create as much of a factory-like environment as possible. And these are complex. Again, I think as Eric's slides showed, they're very large, and the development on the leasing, the permitting, the design, the financing can take up to 6 years, especially in new countries with new markets for offshore wind. Installation typically takes 2 years. They run, of course, for 25 or so years, some potentially longer, and then decommissioning takes place at the end. Most offshore wind farms are located 10 to 60 kilometers from shore. Average speeds are around 9 meters per second. In the future, projects will be deployed up to 200 meters from shore. Singapore's marine industry, as I've already mentioned, is very well suited to transition. Of course, the government is extremely interested in the jobs. And so if you remember on the previous slide, you saw the parts of the value chain. This shows where the jobs are located in that value chain. So according to the International Renewable Energy Agency, 2.1 million person days, or roughly 8,650 full-time equivalent jobs, are created for a typical 500 megawatt offshore wind farm. And as you can see, most of the jobs are concentrated in the O&M space, which is the red on the left, and the manufacturing segments, which is the green. You can see the purple on the lower left, which is the installation. What we found is that Singaporean companies, the capabilities are best fit into the O&M and installation spaces, and probably less so on the manufacturing, given the constraints in space, especially in some of the shipyards. As you could imagine, given the scale of these, it's very difficult, and you need a lot of quayside space. And of course, it's the jobs and what do they pay. So again, very similar to offshore oil and gas, many of the offshore wind jobs pay quite well. So here you can see some of the top 5 jobs in the APAC offshore wind industry. And we worked here with Next Wave partners who deal with the offshore wind industry. And we surveyed a number of the companies and their needs and the types of salaries. So it's a very competitive pay, in the industry. And in summary, offshore wind presents a considerable diversification opportunity for Singapore's marine and offshore engineering companies. And, we're saying they need to act now and really accelerate this. Again, since this work was done around a year ago, we know that there's significant activities taking place by the Singapore companies. And O&M, as I mentioned before, is kind of gives suppliers certainty of long-term demand. The manufacturing, takes place over a relatively short period, but Singapore's marine and offshore engineering companies have a lot of experience maintaining assets in the extremely harsh offshore environments, especially when sort of the safety standards and maintenance practices are highly transferable from the oil and gas space. And emerging offshore wind technologies such as floating turbines offer opportunities for Singapore's industry as well, again, based on the synergies between the both sectors. And, as offshore wind industry expands to new and early stage markets in Asia, the labor requirements call for technical and specialized role across the offshore wind chain. Governments always try to localize as much as possible, but there's still a need for highly skilled and experienced offshore labor. And this is, again, where some of the Singaporean companies do hold a certain advantage over local companies. So again, we see a lot of opportunity for Singapore's marine industry, and wish them all the best. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Crick. I'm the president of Singapore Marine Industry Association, as well as the head of R&D and sustainability for Sembcorp Marine. It's my great pleasure this afternoon here to speak to the Norwegian community. And also alongside, I have a lot of my Singapore members here to support my presentation. I will be sharing from two perspectives. One, as an industry, in a number of slides, and then I also share some specific example from Sembcorp Marine. Association of Singapore Marine Industry represent a rather large industry that has about 1,000. It represents about 1,000 companies that service the entire marine, offshore, and energy industry. I have some colleagues here I met before the start of the event. We have Michael from the Ocean, which is this logo that I use it as an example of a strong marine and offshore company. And also online, we have Dong Liang from ST Marine, which is another marine company that many of you may be familiar with. And I have some colleagues online from Sembcorp Marine supporting me from the back. Okay. And so the association make up of key shipyards and also all the engineering companies, machinery company, to form the total ecosystem, both Singapore-based Singapore company and also international company operating significantly in this region, using Singapore as a regional HQ or as a base to project into the region. And one such company from Norway is Kongsberg, which is also a very important partner for our industry and Sembcorp Marine. Singapore industry traditionally serve about 70% or build and deliver 70% of the oil drill rigs. Sorry. As an industry, we started this journey, oil and gas journey, many decades back to build the strength that we have today. And the industry begins to repivot and embark onto this renewable journey about 10 years back. So you can see a portfolio of products that we have delivered over the last 10 years by various members company of the SME. And thanks, Mark, for sharing a very comprehensive report of the industry on the offshore wind value chain development and many kind words that he has assessed that our industry are on the right pathway going forward. This is a collaboration we have with GWEC to chart the roadmap to help us to be more organized and more systematic in moving forward as a collective industry. As a follow-up actions from this study, which we launched a year back, we have also prepared an industry brochure. This brochure was launched recently and was shared with visitors to our Hamburg Wind exhibition. So you are able to scan this QR code and get digital copies of the brochure to find out more. So I won't go through all the details of the company and the track record that we have gone through. More specifically, using Sembcorp Marine as an example, that's where I do my day job. SME is my national service duty to serve the industry. So I'm more familiar with some of the specific examples from Sembcorp Marine, hence sharing more examples here. Sembcorp Marine has been a major player in global oil and gas and maritime industry for the past decades. And very pleased that we have also transformed. In fact, the transformation is a continuous one. We've gone through a few cycles of ups and downs, and each time we emerge stronger and more relevant. And we are still, while we are talking now, we are still in the midst of a major transformation exercise, okay, that will take the company further into the future. Okay, what we have identified to do is to focus a lot on offshore renewable. Whereas for the oil and gas asset, we need to make it cleaner and greener, lower carbon footprint. And also look at some of the new energy in the future as part of our future business portfolio. And we have a target to achieve 40% of our annual turnover by 2030 to be in the green product solution space. And we say that offshore wind, offshore renewable alone, we are seeing a 7 times increase in revenue, projected revenue between now and 2030, 2031. So that is the kind of growth that we are assessing. And that also presents an opportunity for us to work together to deliver this high volume of business. Mark mentioned that we are in a good position to deliver renewable projects. This is a picture of our Tuas Boulevard yard. It's about started operation 2013, so it's about 9 years, 10 years for the phase 1. Phase 2 completed 2018. Now it's at the 4th year or 5th year. We have a phase 3 developing at the moment. So this is a steel fabrication workshop that generates some 144,000 tons steel per year. That means many rigs, many ships, fully automated. What is interesting here is these 2 cranes. Each of them can lift 15,000 tons. And if you understand offshore wind, HVDC, topside substation is having increasing weight, crossing 10,000 tons per module. Some can reach 20,000 tons. That is a single lift for the topside. So that gives us a lot of strong strategic execution capability for the future renewable projects. Sturgeon is one of the projects that we are executing now. We actually deployed Norwegian designers to design the maneuverability part of the Sturgeon, which is a windmill installation vessels. and Kongsberg provided the control system for the ships. Again, another example of Norwegian contribution or collaboration. We also participated in Europe through our European companies like SLP in the UK to provide maintenance services for the offshore wind. And these are examples of collaboration that we can have if it's more closer to the Norwegian space. There are Norwegian companies that we have that we can put together for such collaboration. Savant SSP, I think I hear one of you mention Savant SSP is a circular hull company that has delivered 12 circular hull for FPSO driller application. And this unit is now being repurposed for a floating wind development. And recently, Sintef Ocean was here working with Savant team and test the unit in TCOMS. So you can see the multi-units collaboration and create quite powerful possibility for all of us. And hopefully that unit will be in the waters at some point. Now it's in the water as a model. I'm talking about physical real units. And Sembcorp Marine also has regional facility that can offer a Norwegian company to provide local contents in this region. Okay, so Indonesian facility and some other location. Okay, so I think that there's a lot of possibility we can work together on for future collaboration. Oh yeah, our partners to deliver projects on the oil and gas side. All these different dots means each of the project delivered by Sembcorp Marine in the Norwegian coast. So this is delivering project to the Norwegian space. So the other way is Norwegian collaborating in Singapore into the Asian space. Right? So in order to have one of the key factors for this strong collaboration is not just delivering project. We are also talking about collaborating at company level. We invested in a number of technology companies in Norway. These are Sembcorp Marine companies in Norway, operating in 3 different Norwegian cities. And they can be your partners if you find it more convenient working in the same city with them alongside. And these people, this team, whenever executing project, our Singapore team are working in the office in Norway. In some part of the project, their team are in Singapore working for the engineering team in the execution phase. So I think that is, again, a very powerful arrangement. So for this very credible sets of deliverables that we make in the oil and gas side, I'm sure we can repeat it in the renewable era as we move forward. I thank all our Norwegian partners for what we have achieved together. Thank you.
Press.
What is it?
Good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Eduardo Carlin, and I'm the Deputy General Manager for Asia Pacific of Mainstream Renewable Power. And today, very briefly, I'll give you a developer's perspective of offshore wind in Southeast Asia. But before I do so, you might be asking yourself, first of all, who is Mainstream Renewable Power and why are we in a Norwegian event? To start off with Mainstream Renewable Power, we are a global renewable energy developer. We were established in 2008 in Ireland, and we are pioneers in the offshore wind space. We developed what is now the largest operational offshore wind project in England, Hornsea 1 and Hornsea 2, which was briefly mentioned earlier. It's now owned by Ørsted from Denmark, but we did the full consent and then we sold it to them. And in parallel to that, we also grew substantially in Africa, in Latin America, both on the offshore side, but also on onshore, where we have combined around 1,400 megawatts or 1.4 gigawatts of projects that are either in construction or operations. And in 2019, we established our regional hub here in Singapore that covers the Asia Pacific region. We are predominantly, let's say, well established in Vietnam and Philippines. Those are our key markets in Asia Pacific, hence why I'll focus on Southeast Asia. But we are also now expanding into Indonesia, Australia, Japan. And going to the second point, why are we here as in a Norwegian event? Well, because Mainstream became a Norwegian company last year. The Aker Group acquired the majority shareholding in Mainstream Renewable Power. And since then, we have become, let's say, a Norwegian company. This collaboration with the Aker Group has been further reinforced this year through the merger between Aker Offshore Wind, which was mentioned earlier, I believe, by Eric, and Mainstream. So now Aker Offshore Wind essentially is part of Mainstream Renewable Power, and it has been incorporated into our offshore wind business unit. So this is the background to Mainstream and to our Norwegian connection. And hopefully here I'll be able to give you some background on what is our view on Southeast Asia and why we are investing very heavily into this part of the world. The slide will help me. There we go. So, as I mentioned earlier, our two key markets in Southeast Asia are Vietnam and Philippines. Combined, we have 37 employees between these two countries and a development pipeline of 2.4 gigawatts across offshore wind, onshore wind, and solar PV. In Vietnam alone, we're doing 1.9 gigawatts of offshore wind. I would say we are probably the largest European offshore wind developer and renewables developer present in Vietnam currently. And the reason why we are investing heavily in these markets is largely driven by the fundamentals, right? And in this slide, hopefully you can appreciate the potential that these markets represent from a pure renewable energy perspective, and more specifically for offshore wind. So combined, these three markets will represent a significant amount of the economic growth over the coming years, of the demographic growth. And with that, obviously, comes immense amount of energy demand. And as you can see here, in the energy mix of these countries, there is a large dependence on fossil fuels. And the governments that are very conscious about the energy trilemma mentioned earlier by Ambassador Eivind, they are accelerating the plans to have this transition becoming a reality. So in Vietnam, for example, the Politburo issued Resolution 55 a few years ago, which essentially outlines the renewable energy strategy for the country and forecasts an increase of the renewable energy presence in the energy mix up to 20% in 2030 and 30% in 2045. These numbers are quite significant, especially if one takes into account the electricity demand that is taking place right now. Right now in Vietnam, they are very much dependent on coal, which is imported, and have a large presence of hydropower. Hydro, however, has been practically all depleted in Vietnam, so there's not much to explore there. Coal is becoming increasingly difficult to finance. Large financing institutions no longer want to finance coal thermal power plants. There is a problem with energy dependence because most of that coal is imported. And finally, there is the gas solution, but that also represents a big challenge because most of the gas would still need to be imported. And currently, from an economic perspective, that also represents quite a challenge. So if we look at Vietnam's energy demands in the coming years, there's very little, let's say, alternative other than renewable energy, particularly offshore wind, given its quite extensive coastline. So that's Vietnam. Moving on to Philippines, which was also mentioned briefly earlier on. This is a market that is also going through a very large electricity demand increase. It is also very much dependent on fossil fuels and more particularly imported fossil fuels. And therefore, the Philippines has also been trying to accelerate its own transition. This is especially the case right now. So the government has announced a number of measures that are favorable to the renewable energy industry with so-called green energy auction programs. They are now in the process of lifting foreign ownership restrictions for renewable energy, which would obviously unlock a lot of foreign investment into the country. And they have this Renewable Energy Act combined with other legislation that forecasts an increase of renewable energy up to 35% in 2030 and 50% in 2040. So again, a very large market to explore and a market where Mainstream as well as other large Norwegian companies are quite present. And then finally, in Southeast Asia, we have Indonesia. And you might be asking, why am I not commenting on the other countries? Put it very briefly, Malaysia does not have much wind resources, so it's not a technology that will particularly flourish in Malaysia. Of course, there's a lot of irradiation, so solar has a big role to play there. And in Thailand and Cambodia, we haven't seen much movement. And again, from a resource perspective, it's not as strong as these three markets that I have highlighted. Indonesia is quite a particular case. And the reason is, yes, Indonesia, like Vietnam and the Philippines, is also going through tremendous economic growth and electricity demand growth. Yes, thermal power plants play a significant role, but the difference between Indonesia and Vietnam and the Philippines is that they are the largest exporter of coal in the world. So the whole discussion on energy security, energy dependence that applies to Philippines and Vietnam doesn't really apply so much to Indonesia. Of course, there are many other factors that come into play, and we therefore are quite confident that the energy transition will get to Indonesia. It is, let's say, a bit delayed compared to the other markets, but in our point of view, it's a matter of when rather than a matter of if. It might take still a long time. I was in Indonesia 12 years ago developing what became the first solar PV project or utility scale solar PV project, and not much has happened since then. Whereas in these other markets, a lot has been built. In any case, the government has been trying to implement legislation that will stimulate the industry. The Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources has established this target to reach 23% of renewable energy by 2025. I don't think it will be achievable, but it's there, it's on paper. There is a bit of a disconnect at the moment between the Ministry of Energy's targets and the actual utility company PLN implementation of these targets, simply because PLN reports into a different ministry. So they're not directly accountable to the Ministry of Energy, but to the Ministry of State-owned enterprises. And in any case, hopefully we will see the transition getting to Indonesia. So this is a broad perspective from a developer point of view. As you can see, a lot of potential, a lot of investment requirements to come. Singapore will play a very important role because most of the independent power producers and developers that invest in these countries have regional headquarters here, like Mainstream. And therefore, hopefully there will be a lot of opportunities for Singaporean companies, financing institutions to play a relevant role. And I hope that with this, you get a good view of the investment opportunities and the potential in the region.
Proceed.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Venbius and Anders, for the invitation. I just came to Singapore 2 days ago, so I'm a bit jet lagged, but I'll try my best. So my name is Murshid. I'm the co-CEO of SkyFree. SkyFree is a fast-growing Norwegian climate, and what we do is taking care of solar power plants.
Litt mer i midten for de som ser remote.
Yeah, so this is Skyfree in a snapshot. We were established about 1 year ago, June 21. We've grown quite fast since then. We grow through acquisitions, targeted acquisitions, and also organic growth. We monitor about 4 gigawatts globally in most continents in the world. And we take care of 300 solar power plants globally. Everything from 200 kilowatts to as big as over 1 gigawatt. We've raised $10 million till date for our expansion, and we believe we've really hit the nail in terms of growth in renewable markets. So very short on the team. The company was started by me and co-founder, co-CEO Petter, and also Pratik. We've been serial entrepreneurs for quite some time. I was also one of the founders behind a Norwegian IPP called Norsk Solar, independent power producer. We built solar power plants in Vietnam, in Brazil, in South Africa, etc. We listed that on Euronext Growth, Oslo Stock Exchange last year. And it was really through the journey of Norsk Solar, we realized that something needed to be done on the asset operation side of taking care of solar power plants. We're very lucky to be backed by some of the best venture capital funds globally, including Speed Invest and All Iron Ventures, etc. And some of you might know our chairwoman. She used to be the CEO of Innovation Norway. So what do we do in a nutshell? We solve some of the pressing challenges in taking care of solar power plants. In general, you can divide the solar operations into 3 brackets. You have SCADA systems, you have software, and you have the operation and maintenance. SCADA systems for solar power plants are very complicated still. They are legacy systems from large industrial and centralized power plants. They're not really built for solar. There's a complex and long installation time, and you need expertise to install them at the plants. Often they are only installed at solar power plants above 10 megawatts. And when I say SCADA systems, it's not only a data logger, it's also the systems that actually controls the power plants, switch them on and off, etc. And then you have the software solutions. So there's a lot of different software solutions out there, but what they do is in general just monitor production. And they try to connect to the SCADA systems, but they don't really talk to each other because there's different suppliers, etc. And then you have operation and maintenance, which is the largest part of taking care of a solar power plant. And it's these guys that you see here. They do the manual work. It's very set. It's done in intervals. And there's no technology. And the cost is very non-transparent. So this is how we change it. We offer a complete integrated approach. We deliver something called Skyfree Solar SCADA, which is an innovative solution. It's one box. It includes weather stations, parameters, everything you need to monitor and control a solar power plant. And it's built at our assembly in Denver in the US. And that integrates directly with Skyfree Intelligence, which is a really powerful software that we've developed. The software gives you insight onto everything that happens at the solar power plant, and you get back to the details afterwards. And then we have Skyfree O&M, which is a platform that creates alarms and ticketing systems that goes directly out to manual staff at site. There's another big difference between us and incumbent players is that we offer an innovative business model. So today, the asset operations, as mentioned, they're divided into 3 silos. So there's also 3 different suppliers you need to pay. So you need to pay to the SCADA provider, you need to pay to the software provider, and then you also need to pay to the operation and maintenance staff. And this is something we learned when we were building Norsk Solar is, for example, we have a site in Vietnam, it's 11 megawatts, distributed assets, 1 megawatt on shopping malls, 11 shopping malls around the country. It's very difficult to know whether they're cleaned, when it happens, there's no insight for us. So we really wanted to solve this issue. Also with payment, because the costs are a little bit blurry for everyone that has done operations and maintenance, you might know that. With Sky-Free, you would only have 1 service provider for everything. So you build a solar power plant, you call to us, Sky-Free, and we take care of this plant. You only pay for what you use. It's a subscription model, it's a SaaS model. We built this product with technology hats on compared to other players in the industry. It's a SaaS fee that is built monthly, and we have a very simple 3-month notice period. Everything is transparent and easy for the client. So this is one example from the US. It's a small ground mount solar power plant, about 1.5 megawatt. Their challenge is that there's no customized SCADA for solar, but we built and we ship our box to their site. It's very easy for them to install it. It's a plug and play solution. It takes 3 days instead of a month, and it requires less expertise. So once they've installed this box, it connects to Sky-Free Intelligence. And Sky-Free Intelligence, I would say, is a very unique product out there. It has everything in one dashboard. So you can see all of your sites, very powerful AI. We have 150 algorithms that runs on the platform. It gives you granular insight in any problem that happens on the platform, whether it's cloud coverage, inverter tripping, soiling, etc. It's also built in a very tech SaaS way where you can add modules and you can remove modules, and that will increase or decrease your costs, basically. For example, we have a billing module for commercial and industrial power plant owners who sell their electricity to B2B off-takers. So we can automatically figure out how much they need to invoice to the client, and we do that, everything digitalized. Instead of how they do it today, they sit and work on Excel sheets. And this connects to Sky-Free Operation Maintenance, which is our O&M platform. It creates alarms. These alarms get sent out to staff on ground, on premises, and they come and fix issues when problems happen. So we don't have the operation maintenance staff. We have the platform that connects to suppliers in various countries. That makes our product and solution extremely scalable. So summary, strong team, high growth market. We've integrated innovation in each cycle of the solar asset operations. We are doing innovation onto the business model and a very highly scalable business model technology. Thank you.
Lisa?
Yes, my name is Hans Christian Rivenes, and I head up the corporate banking team for DNB lending team here in Asia, covering the whole of APAC. Thank you so much for inviting us to speak about offshore wind here today. And what makes DNB so excited about offshore wind? Firstly, it's an important for the energy transition to a greener world, as a lot of us has talked about today. And DNB, they want to be a driving force in this sustainable transition. And as we have seen, it's enormous growth projections and also a lot of business opportunities. And thirdly, and as a lot of you have also said, a lot of DNB's clients within offshore oil and gas, offshore oil field services and shipping, they have the necessary capabilities to compete in this market and have already started to do so. So we in DNB, we have invested a lot of resources to understand this market, to be able to advise our clients, and also to be able to put our balance sheet behind the right projects. So if you look at the market today, energy mix today, as you see, it's very little coming from solar and wind, only 2%, and 80% is from fossil sources. And what do we believe in the future? A lot of research has been done looking at what will the energy mix be in the future. I think maybe one of the most quoted ones are IEA, and they have forecasted energy mix in 3 different scenarios. So the first one is the stated policy scenario, where we only take into the stated policies, and here you see 5 times more solar and wind energy. And then if you go to the announced pledges, that is what all the governments have said that they would want to do, but not yet stated as the policies. There you see 7 to 8 times more wind and solar. And where we all want to be, the net zero scenario, it's equivalent to the 1.5 degree scenario. Here you need to invest a lot. You have to go 15 times more in wind and solar in order to reach net zero. And as a banker, we always want to see how much does this cost. So if we look at clean energy investments per annum, today we invest around $1,300 billion in clean energy investments. And we wanted to go here in the net zero scenario. That is where we aim for, what we aim for. Here you need to invest $3,500 billion per year until 2030 to get there. And I think these are so big numbers, but to put them in perspective, today it's around 1.5% of total world GDP. And to get to the net zero where we want to be, it's close to 4% of world GDP. And then looking at offshore wind, you see it's a massive growth projections here as well. Today, if you look, take away China, it's installed around 35 gigawatts and mainly in Europe. And by 2030, we expect this to be 8 times more. And as you see here, actually Asia will be the second largest operation or area of offshore wind. And DNB is an active advisor and capital provider in several parts of this offshore wind industry. In fact, we have arranged more than 10 billion in capital towards offshore wind vessels and wind parks. And I'm a corporate banker, so I always look at the risks of lending to this. And that is quite different from lending to installation and service vessels and offshore wind parks. So I'll try to highlight some short notes about different risks. So if we start with offshore wind vessels, very broadly, they can be divided into two different categories. First, installation vessels and service vessels. And if you look at installation vessels, we typically see very low contract visibility and high complexity. While for the service vessels, we see much, at least relatively less complexity and much longer contract visibility. So as you may expect, it's easier to attract better financing terms for the service vessels with no high contract visibility or long contracts and low complexity. And what we see is that it's very hard for single asset owners to attract financings, especially in the installation vessels. So we have seen consolidation in this market. And then if you look at financing offshore wind parks, this is normally done on a project finance basis, meaning no recourse to the owner or the sponsor. That means that you need to minimize the risks as much as you can. And we have learned since we financed our first offshore wind park more than 10 years ago that no two projects are the same. And it's extremely important to assess all the different risks in each project in detail. But for offshore wind projects, you have very similar risks as in many other project finance risks. So you have the regulatory risks, you have the technical risks, and you have the financial risks. And of course, also environmental risks. But I don't have really time to go through all the different risks in detail here now. But for especially what I like to highlight is the construction risks for offshore wind parks. That is of big importance for the banks to understand. Firstly, if you construct anything offshore, it is normally very hard, and you may have very severe weather conditions that is impossible to predict. And secondly, a lot of coordination among different subcontractors you need to do that. And not only for the wind park itself, but also for connections to the grid, to the shore. And we have seen significant delays, both due to weather conditions and to grid connections. That has caused a logistical nightmare to the operators, heavily affecting sponsors' contingency budgets. So from a bank's perspective, it's extremely important to look at the operator's experience. So to sum up, offshore wind is expected to grow massively, very important for the green shift. Offshore wind is very complex with a lot of risks attached, but we see that it is capital available for the right sponsors and the right projects. In DNB, we invest a lot to understand this market very well, to advise our clients, and to be able to support with our own balance sheet for the right projects. So thank you.
There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Dear Excellency, Eivind Humme, NBAS, Innovation Norway, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here today and talk from Norway about floating solar that Ocean Sun is working on, technology. My name is Arg Larsen. I'm the Regional Director for Ocean Sun in Southeast Asia, and usually based in Singapore when I'm not in Norway. Ocean Sun is a Norwegian company that has different technology for solving a lot of the challenges that are associated with the conventional types of floating solar technologies available. There is a lot of push these days to put solar and also wind, of course, as we have heard so far, on areas that are not affecting land space and the use of land space. And the market potential for floating solar is massive. So the current 99 or more % of installed floating solar so far has been on very quiet inland benign water bodies, reservoirs and dams and such. And there is still a lot of space on this type of installation surface. But Ocean Sun aims also to unlock potential for nearshore, very tricky hydro dams, and even offshore environments. So, and if we can sort of solve this puzzle of installation locations, then the installation potential for floating solar is fairly unlimited. We have about 70% water on the Earth's surface, and this gives a lot of a lot of solar installations if we utilize it. Ocean Sun is a, let's call it a technology evolution from away from buoyant pontoons of various sizes and designs that most of the other competing technologies are working with. It's a hydroelastic membrane inside a salmon farm, to put it very plainly. We use the outer structure, the double ring structure, usually of a aquaculture type installation, where we farm salmons in Norway, for instance. And this design basically revolutionized the salmon industry in Norway 20, 30 years ago and has been built in the tens of thousands since. So we're thinking that this is a very good and sturdy outer installation component to put a membrane inside, which allows us to have the least amount of material per floating panel. And it also scales quite nicely. So instead of having a fixed number of pontoons that needs to be installed per panel, we can fit up to 1,900 solar panels inside each of these rings on a membrane. So we gain a good economy of scale, and each of our systems is then 0.6 to 0.7 megawatts. And we're also substituting then thousands of these pontoons per ring. The effect of this is that you have a large, robust float that can handle waves in particular much better than the pontoons. If I can get this thing to play. There we go. So you see here on the system that we have, we avoid mechanical fatigue. We avoid spraying on the panels by seawater or dirty reservoir water underneath, and this allows for a very long-term and durable platform for solar panels to basically enjoy the installation space they're given. We also cool the panels directly with the seawater or pond water below the panels, so we get a higher efficiency on the panels based on the temperature lowering from the direct absorption of the seawater. So both these videos are from the Philippines, where we had a test system now for 3.5 years, which is in good shape, and we have done a lot of testing and measurement and taken out panels and done EL testing over time to verify that it's structurally a good place for panels to be, and very much aiming for this Philippine market as well as the other markets in the region to install more. Wind is good, but there are sort of prime areas for wind, and it needs to be quite far outside the coast. while solar on nearshore or hydro dams or inland water bodies is widely available in the whole region. So the combination of a large system that has seaworthiness enables us to get a lower capex on tricky locations in particular. We get a higher efficiency because of the water cooling. It's a fairly straightforward installation. There's no nuts and bolts and such on our panel. You slide the panels into pre-attached rails on the platform. We don't have issues with biofouling that is quite rampant in the tropical regions because of engineering on the membrane itself and the fact that it doesn't let any light through in the center or inside underneath the platform. We get some biofouling on the pipes around it, but we're not concerned about that. So subsea maintenance should be absolute minimal. We get a very high reduction in mooring points. That is usually a big challenge for floating solar. So we can get away with a few mooring points per megawatt compared to 30-40 mooring points per megawatt on alternative solutions. Also, our membranes are easy to pack, so they can be shipped quite efficiently. We get 2 membranes or 1 megawatt of installation membrane in 1 container. And we have a existing industry of hydrodynamics on the ring and also the mooring systems and such with DNV classifications and BV classifications and so forth to be able to verify the mooring analysis and the installation of the systems, which is challenging on many of the other alternative solutions. We do, as a consequence of our design, collect rainwater, which is a bit of a hassle because you have to pump it out. But on many locations around Southeast Asia, on islands and such, also Pacific and other areas where water is scarce, you can actually use the platforms as water collection. And if they're close enough to land, it's quite easy to just pump all the rainwater onto tanks that are on the beach or close to where the systems are placed. If you're not using this rainwater for potable use, you can also collect it for maintenance and basically store rainwater in tanks around the system, so you have clean water available when you want to do cleaning of the systems. In Singapore in particular, we have had good traction the last year. So we have 3 projects that will hopefully all come to light next year. We're working with Sensip and Keppel and in the Harbourcraft electrification project. And we hope to see systems both outside the southern islands of Singapore and around Jurong and closer to the mainland. So this will be important demonstration project for us that will potentially unlock what we would sort of consider scale projects in the future. Very quickly, the basics of the system is this buoyancy ring that we have around the membrane, and then we have bridle lines and buoys to have horizontal forces on the system itself, while the buoys and the mooring system absorb any vertical forces going down to dead weights on the seabed. This is coupled with quite conventional string inverters and transformers solutions that are available from various technology providers of inverters and transformers. We do a slight modification on our solar panels, so they're able to easily slide into the membrane. We don't need a frame that you usually find on panels because there are no external support needed. The panels are laying flat on the membrane, and the water displacement underneath the panel supports the whole area very efficiently. We put the junction boxes on the front to avoid having those rubbing against the panel on the back. And we do some tricks on basically waterproofing the panels additionally so that they are will sort of survive the 20 years, 30 years that we expect them to on the system. As mentioned, there's no nuts and bolts on the system. We have this small profiles on the side of the panels, and there is a cater rail on the membrane that they can slide into. So we can utilize on location cheap local labor for the most part of the installations, which is carrying and planning or placing the panels. A quick video of construction of our systems, basically making this ring, which can be a single ring or a double ring depending on the location where we install and the climate environmental forces. After the ring and the membrane is attached, we can launch it out as a big platform that can be easily pushed around. And then you have a crew of anywhere between 20 and 50 people to run around and slide all the panels into the slots. The membrane is like basically like walking on a big trampoline, so it's quite easy to have lots of people on it, and it will also support weight of, you know, pallets of up to pallets of panels up to a ton and such, that you can place directly on the membrane if you choose. We do variations of our engineering for the different markets that was mentioned earlier in the presentation. So we would have a single ring, which is a very lean and cost-effective system for the benign water bodies like reservoirs and such. Double ring, which is more like the aquaculture installations used for nearshore or hydro dams with a high water level variation. This will also be then sound for rivers, mangroves, places with debris, as the outer rings of this double ring system is robust and designed to basically absorb impacts with feed vessels on the fish farms and such. This makes a lot of sense on these markets that are a bit more challenging than your inland ponds. And we are also working on offshore double ring designs that are then primarily intended to be connected to wind turbines. We have done a 0.5 megawatt trial on this recently, where the two of these rings are connected to wind turbines. And the combination here is quite interesting, because usually when you have very nice sunny weather, you don't really have a lot of wind. So you can use the internal transformer in the wind turbine that is already there, and basically use that to transmit PV power when you don't have wind. So we did 3 designs. We then achieve various levels of cost per watt, which is how we usually determine the price of solar installations, from single ring to this double offshore ring, which is a bit smaller. So the cost for this, also the more complex mooring, makes the cost quite a bit higher than the single and double ring alternatives. And these prices are then everything in the installation except for the solar panels. Solar panels are varying quite a bit in price, so we tend to communicate the prices without the solar panels. But usually the solar panels add up to 50% or more of the total cost. So we should be quite competitive to even land-based installations in many markets. For scaling up the systems, we would make clusters of rings. So on the left side here, you see the cluster that we're building in Albania. On the right side, we have these 2 rings that we connect to a wind turbine. The proximity of the rings is typically determined by the environmental forces, winds and waves and such. And the more wind and wave, the sort of the spacing between the rings has to be slightly bigger. But in most conditions, we can make a cluster of rows of double row rings. That would be sort of the main building block for scaling up the systems. And thank you for listening to our floating solar technology.
Yes.
Yep. Do I need a microphone?
Depends on your
Well,
volume of
depends.
your voice.
Ladies and
Just-
no, I think I will sound. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry, Ambassador. 10 minutes to go before you can go home in a bar, whatever you would like to do, or back to work for our colleagues and friends back in Europe. You have to face me, but I will make it quick. And I'm going to talk about Fred Olsen, what we're going to do here in the region. I would like to guide you through 3 topics for today. Fred Olsen related companies and the introduction. Marine floating PV. I just have been talking about mainly sweetwater bodies. And why are we here in Singapore? How does it work? It doesn't work. Maybe I have to. Here we go. Fred Olsen, we are obviously a Norwegian company. Looking back onto 170 years, shy above 170 years company history. And I have to go back because I skipped one. Here we are. We started with transporting and shipping ice from Norway to England. Is how we started our businesses. And you can see we have done a lot. We have been in shipping, obviously, in aviation. We have been playing an essential role in the oil and gas business in Norway. We sold all our carbon-related assets a couple of years back. We're only focusing nowadays on renewable energy. It is still owned by the same family. We are stock listed through our holdings in Norway. I've seen it, Bonheur Holding. At least parts of our business, not all, still family owned and family controlled. We are shy above 2,400 employees, only focusing on renewable energy, active in 40 countries. We have renewable energy services and technology and innovation. I'm the managing director for Fred Olsen Renewables. I'm based here in Singapore, clocking 17 years in Singapore. Prior to it, I was a couple of years in China, all the way through renewable energy, large scale PV and wind asset development. We are an IPP, so we are acting technology agnostic. And our core focus market is still back in Europe. We are also developing offshore wind projects, and we just have incorporated a new company called Fred Olsen Seawind, focusing only on offshore wind. We have to do it because at one point in time, we need to stock list this company as well because of the sheer equity demand. Sorry. Also, we operate a couple of jackup vessels. We're covering roughly 20% of the global offshore wind turbine installations. We operate 4 vessels, and we also have service, and we also provide service through the installation. We currently pushing the envelope a little bit further, focusing on floating PV as well. Are just has been talking about floating PV as well. We call it technology level number 8, is applicable. And we are focusing on marine floating. So currently most of the installation, or nearly all, for floating PV, you find on sweetwater bodies, but we are going to push that envelope out into the sea, where you face totally different wind and wave conditions. We think we are gaining a strong track record in doing this now since a couple of years. Like I said, we are technology agnostic, so we are not a technology provider per se, but we have a very, coming from looking back on 170 years marine expertise, very good knowledge about the mooring and anchoring systems. So we do in-house. Looking into this, we also mapped all 40 concepts currently, maybe there are more available, for floating PV. We mapped them, we benchmarked them, and we had also a risk assessment to understand which kind of technology potentially we can use to really use it for marine floating PV. We are in very close contact with the insurances and independent third-party companies like DNV. Finally, because our game is to make that type of technology bankable. This is our core view, and it has never been done before. And we have financed our previous wind projects mainly on balance sheet finance, but for the large-scale floating PV, we are aiming for bank financing. We are having also own patents on certain wave breaker technologies, mooring and anchor systems, and we have one company called Fred Olsen 1848 looking into the technology-related aspects. We are working strongly in R&D, also here in Singapore, together with the Sirius Institute here in Singapore. Interestingly, the Sirius Institute has been funded and incorporated when REC, together with the Orkla Group, invested 1.3 billion back in 2008-9 here in Tuas, was the single largest investment after the casino. In the world largest at that point of time, solar cell was also for ingots, solar cells, wafer cells and module manufacturing site. A prerequisite, because I was with REC in the past as well, was that we asked them to incorporate research facilities. So in the end, it came hand in hand with a Norwegian investment, again here in Singapore. We are working with this, we are currently, I would say, the key industrial partner for the Sirius Institute if it comes to floating PV. They're among the top 3 research institutes if it comes to solar anyway, and I would say they're the leading institute if it comes to floating PV. We are looking with them together on different type of work packages, extreme loads and fatigue, environmental impact, at least for technology related performance. We are doing currently the coding to understand, for example, as a simple example, if you're floating PV on wave conditions, the strings and the MPP tracking might be differently to what you are used to. So we are looking into it, and innovation, best of breed solutions. Going further. Sorry. Here, motivations for basin testing. We also have one basin here in Singapore, as you may know. But we use the Sintef Ocean back in Norway, because everybody is talking about floating solar, but has it ever been done really in test conditions? It hasn't. So we have taken the first solutions and tested them into real wind and wave conditions. We have tested up to 8-meter wave height if we really go into ocean conditions, and how we can manage it. So we build a scale 1:16, which has been funded by the EU government as well. And what we want to go from numerical to basin tests, and then we go to the ocean installation. What are the key learnings we take away from this type of testing is the mooring design, hydrodynamical behavior, as well as an environmental load. And you can see here what it takes if such a wave is really lifting up your panels, if they are flat on the ground. So there are many aspects you need to take care about. Why are we here in a region? For example, if it comes to equity financing, so just for example, Capital Infrastructure Trust, so we have one fund, so they invested in one of our 3 of our wind projects back in Europe, where we operate close to 1 gigawatt onshore wind farms. So as a facility, 480 million euro we have in place, together also with the Munich Re. So Singapore is an attractive place when it comes to insurances, financing. We hope it's a bit. We use Singapore for our ships. We just recently in Q1, we had our turn Bold here for upgrading on a Keppel Werft as well at the yard, to install a 1,600-ton crane catered for the latest offshore wind turbine installations. You can see this here was in Singapore. We operate, like I said, 3 to 4 ships. We use the region for networking building. We had in construction on the Aboitiz Integrated Economic Center in the Philippines. They built one of our vessels, Austral, finally built it as all for the relation and network we have here in the region. The cut is a trimaran, or trimaran is operating in the Canary Islands nowadays. for Fred Olsen Seawind, and then also for myself, being responsible for Fred Olsen as a managing director. We are developing from Singapore onwards our offshore floating projects together with the R&D and partnership arrangements we are developing actively here in the region. And for example, Fred Olsen wind carrier, we are installing in Taiwan currently. The whole turn is currently in Taiwan for the 600 megawatt offshore wind installations over there. Go to the back.
All right. Thank you so much for everyone sharing. Really interesting, and this is a topic that Team Norway guaranteed is coming back to next year because it's simply not disappearing. So thank you all, and thank you for those following us from home.